Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our second edition of the Delta Dispatch Unscripted. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Eric Best. I will give him an opportunity to introduce himself, but as you all know, THC drinks as a category really only have a future as a part of a larger whole. That whole being the wider beverage industry that pre-existed THC drinks. With that in mind, that's what makes me so excited about this guest. This guest is an expert on beverage alcohol, and I'll let him speak a little bit about himself. So with no further ado, welcome, Eric.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. If you can let's start off with just a quick introduction. Would love to hear about your background in the space, and if you're open to sharing a little bit about your journey in more recent research for yourself and kind of how these worlds are colliding. Maybe that's a great place to start, and then we'll kick into some more topics.
Sure. Yeah. Again, thanks for having me. Appreciate being called expert in anything. That's awesome. So, I began a career in the beer business back in the 80s, and bring some context, some later remarks perhaps. I came on just as light beer was starting to explode in the early 80s, and started with Anheuser-Busch. They had missed a boat, quite candidly, on light beer, and Miller Lite taking off and challenging their supremacy in the business. And so it was an intensely competitive time, and ultimately Coors advanced to the East Coast. And so I was there during a number of noteworthy experiences and moves in the marketplace. Then I went to work with one of the distributors. I was a district manager in one of the distributors in Southern Maryland. And it was a great place to work. Bob Hall, great family legacy business, began at the end of Prohibition. And so got a great sense of history of the beer business through the family that I essentially worked for. And I was the operating partner of the business, but not the majority owner of the business. And I started out working as a sales manager, did that for nearly 20 years. And then my mentor and good friend, fellow named Al Horton, he retired. And I was honored to move in to hit that slot as the operating partner in as the brewery calls them, the equity agreement manager from the AB side anyway. And that was right at the point that the sweet spot for entering craft had just passed. And in our business, we had not jumped on that bandwagon on the front end of that. So I started a campaign of catch up. And then over the next, 5 or 6 years, was really proud of our team and the wherewithal they had, the work ethic, entrepreneurialism they had, that we really built out our portfolio. And over the next 10 years, we doubled our business. So I spent not quite 20 years in that role before retiring in late 2019. While in that role as the general manager, I was really fortunate to be appointed to the Anheuser-Busch Wholesaler Distributor Panel and honored to serve as chairman of that panel. Overlapping that period, really got involved with NBWA, and as a mentor years ago told me, whether you like it or not, you needed to be engaged at the political level because either you have a seat at the table or be eaten at the table. And I just remember the first time I ever heard that. And so I was actively involved. People say, oh, you must have really enjoyed it. No, I really didn't enjoy it at all. I wanted to just run our business, but it was just a necessary part of the business and sustaining the very healthy regulatory environment that we had in our business for all 3 tiers of our business. And then through that, I ended up being very involved with the National Beer Wholesalers Association and was honored to serve in leadership roles in that group. And then subsequent to retiring, have now moved in some coaching and consulting roles and working with a technology company on some really exciting technology that is all about functionality for a very unique product and then some coaching, and my passion is working and developing frontline leadership in any kind of business. So I really enjoy doing that. And then currently, I guess my only real official role left in the beer business is I'm a trustee on the Center for Alcohol Policy, which actively engages in discussions about the alcohol regulatory environment and what's most healthy for all players in the environment, including and especially non-drinkers, and that's the public. So was concerned not solely for the economic fortunes of the people in the business, but the safety and good health of people who are not.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And thanks for the shout out on the Alcohol Law Policy Conference. For those that are watching, I am happy to be attending that event. Will be next week. And to the extent that we're able to, we'll report back on what we learned through the Delta Dispatch. So stay tuned for that. Before we kick off into some of these more pointed questions, for the audience who might not be as in tune with some of the eras of the beer industry, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but how would you describe the kind of overall path? You talked about light beer. My understanding is that beer as a category was continuing to grow through all of this. You were really talking about share shift within a growing category. And then you mentioned craft. I think seltzer was a more recent phenomenon, but can you kind of speak as a distributor, what is it like to deal with the new thing for each of those? And maybe I'm missing some other trends in between, but as a distributor, what does that mean for the business itself?
Yeah, it's what I learned from my experience is the importance of keeping your eye out, and thinking farther out. And so, I used to talk to our team of folks who were on the street every day. And I said, your job is to make sure we win today. And my job is to make sure we win tomorrow. And so I always kept my eyes on the horizon, and that learning came from missing the boat and seeing others miss the boat. And so there's an evolution that really needs to take place. So when you think of, you talked about some eras, for lack of a better word, and I spoke of light beer. I talked about the craft. I talked about the seltzer. Right now, you're seeing infused waters, energy drinks, things of that nature.
Non-alc.
Non-alc is a great example. I mean, that's the hot category in terms of percentage growth, perhaps, in the beer business today. And for the sake of the listeners, I am not an operator today. I'm a spectator at this point, but I stayed dialed in and stayed in tune, and just had a monthly phone call with friends of mine who remain actively involved. And so, try to stay on top of these things. But anyway, back to, trying to stay ahead of the trends, try to see what's coming and evolve your business. And so a big deal as we tried to enter the craft business was the craft brewers were saying, well, you don't have any expertise in craft beer. You're just a bud guy. And so I remember talking to another person who was a mentor of mine at a distant level. He may not know it, but he was. And his name was Edwin Pearlstein. And he said to me at one point, he goes, it's one thing to be a beer distributor. It's another thing to be a beverage distributor. And he said, smart ones are beverage distributors. And so I always kept that in mind. And so our territory demanded diversity because of the ethnic diversity in our territory. It was the county where we were right outside of Washington, D.C., and the county that we did 80% of our business was contiguous to D.C. It was 70% Black, about 20% Latino, less than, somewhere 5 to 10% white. And so, that brand set that worked perfectly in the middle of Texas or Oklahoma was not an urban brand set. And so we were always a low share market. And so we were always trying to position ourselves for things that appealed to our demographics. And so it was important to build out our company with subject matter experts, as well as for both brands and categories as well as ethnicities, the population that we served. And then you're always looking to build out your infrastructure to support whatever you do. And so you couldn't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to go get craft beer and be a craft beer distributor. No, you had to build the expertise and prove your worthiness to be a craft beer distributor and that you're a subject matter expert. And ultimately, I've always shared with folks, and certainly shared with our team, the day that a beer distributor becomes a logistics company and a delivery company is the day we've really lost the largest share of our value. And so it's important that we are beer salesmen and brand builders, not just a logistics company.
Or to take your words, even just beverage salespeople to know the whole category. I think one story you shared with me about that Maryland area, the market area for you, I think you said towards the end of your time there, you all had moved, in fact, into non-alc, including like Jarritos, because there's a strong demand for that type of product. And I think an important thing for the audience to understand is that for beer distributors, and please tell me if I am getting this wrong, but volume growth is very important because of the nature of the business. The truck itself is kind of a fixed cost. And so you need to push volume through the system. Is that a fair characterization?
Totally. And, I don't know the soda business and I don't really know the water business. And we carried non-alcs, we had waters, but that wasn't the primary focus. So my expertise is on the alcohol side of the business and the non-alcohol beers. Okay. So I went into the beer business. But yeah, you're right. I back to watching trends around the country. I look at Modelo Especial. And I remember being on the Constellation Council, and it was their distributor council, and talking to the guy who's brilliant, he's a genius, Jim Sabia, who was their director of marketing, and was talking about Modelo Especial versus Corona. And it was when Modelo surpassed Corona as the number one brand in California. And wow, who would ever have thought, that happened in my, era in the business. And so I was like, wow, so that's a trend that you're watching, and how rapidly is that going to move across the country? When you looked at the seltzers, that started in a relatively small market. Don't hold me to this, so you feel free to fact check me, but I think it was in the Cape Cod area up around New England where the first really took off. And I'm trying to think of the brand that really caught everybody's attention. And then that seltzer market just exploded. Well, then I was in a business group with a number of other just exceptionally talented wholesalers, and some of them were talking about this product called Jarritos. And it was primarily a product that was favored in the Latino community. And I was looking at that, and I'd go out in our market and I started looking for it, and I saw pallets of this stuff. And I was saying, okay, well, there's a product that has scale. And so really started exploring that. I didn't acquire that before I retired, but shortly after that, Anheuser-Busch obviously had their eye on it too, because there's some sort of a range between Anheuser-Busch and Jarritos. And now, my former company, they have it, but that product has just exploded. And so you're always trying to position yourself, but you also have to prepare yourself for the trendiness of things. So if we had, just ditched effort on other products to focus on one, well, seltzers have proved to be somewhat trendy. Craft proved to be somewhat trendy. But
as in, there's a peak to it, and there's this other side of that hill, kind of.
Yeah, but the cool thing is there's a peak, but there's a settling spot that's typically very healthy. And so that becomes a core part of your business. And so a consultant said to me one day, you don't build the church for Easter Sunday. And so, but you're building your church, to expand your portfolio. You got to do it tactically and strategically.
Yeah. So another thing that I want to make sure that the audience understands. So we've talked a little bit about how important volume growth is. new categories can provide that, and also obviously pricing. In other words, increasing pricing on the same product year over year is another way to grow revenue, quite obviously. Sure. I think one thing that is not well understood by, I think, our audience is what it's been like as a distributor in the context of growth through M&A. So if you could just give a little bit of context on what that story has been like the last 10 or 20 years and why maybe mergers and acquisitions are not as viable of a growth lever as it used to be.
I don't know the numbers. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to just hazard a guess. Okay.
Sure.
Feel free to fact check me. I think the numbers of transactions for acquiring other beer distributors, that number may have declined. Mm-hmm. But the size of those, each individual transaction seems to be getting bigger and bigger. And so while there are still relatively small businesses, and this is totally arbitrary on my part, but I used to describe us as a large, small distributor, and we aspired to be a mid-size. And so like anything under 5 million cases a year, I called small. Anything in the 5 to 10, I called mid-size. Anything over 10, you're getting big. And man, there have been some mega transactions. One was announced yesterday with a distributor in Cleveland.
Oh, I missed that.
The AB distributor there just sold to a very large concern. A big one a couple of years ago was bought by a private equity group or maybe a family trust. I'm not sure what the label would be for it, but it was Redwood Capital, and they paid north of $1 billion for a combined beer, wine, and a distributor also in Ohio. A couple of huge transactions in Texas. And so what's becoming difficult in the acquisition is those smaller ones, the easy ones that are contiguous to your territory, those are gradually evaporating. And so, in the case of my business, there was still a very small one to the south. And then there was potentially one to the north. And then distributors farther to the north, there were friends, but they were also competitors for these acquisitions. We're competing for the same territories, but those opportunities are getting fewer and fewer. And then those that are for some of these big ones, a company like ours just can't afford that. So we just dismiss. So we said, okay, we've got 2 distributors, one to the south, which is likely one day, one to the north, which is a 50-50 proposition, but we can't wait. We've got to grow. So we had to look for other means of growing. And so, acquisitions, take multiple forms. And one is buying a distributor. The most logical thing to do is buy one that's contiguous. But there are those distributors who have chosen to buy non-contiguous, and they find back of the house synergies and that kind of thing. But then, the next way to go, obviously, is be excellent with the portfolio that you have, but then look for opportunities to acquire brands. All right. We made a big brand acquisition by another distributor that came in. A lot of depending on your state's laws, if there is a change in ownership in some markets, like it was in ours, well, then it is open season for suppliers to negotiate with others. They don't necessarily have to convey those brands to a buyer of a new buyer of a distributorship. So that's what we look for, and we would look for those opportunities to buy brands that fit our portfolio. So that was another way to do it. And then the other is to move into new categories. And so in my history, getting after the craft category and building our reputation as a beverage wholesaler. And so my goal was to build a business and build our share. Some people buy it, some people don't, but I personally buy it. There was a study years ago in one of the major business schools called PIMS, and profit implications of market share, I think, was what that stood for. But that was something that Anheuser-Busch talked about years ago. But let's just face it, when you have share, you have leverage, right? And when you have leverage and you can lead the execution in a store, then when a new supplier comes along and you're encouraging them to go out and take a look at your sales execution, they're going to see the dominant player in the store, and that's going to make it easier to get new brands going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we really focused on that with building our portfolio, gaining our share, being excellent for all suppliers. So we became the easy choice for new suppliers that came to market, regardless of what the category was.
I love this. I think we've set the stage really well. We're talking about avenues for growth, and we're touching now kind of transitioning to new categories. We have been in discussions about the opportunity for THC drinks, and exactly one of the questions we get very often is, what is that going to look like? What we know, we have some sense of where it is today, how it's selling well in certain states, certain beer distributors are carrying these products. We get questions all the time as to what is it going to look like if and when a mega distributor like you're referring to, will they ever carry? What does that look like? And I think we are trying. Nobody has the answer to that, but I'd love to spend the rest of this call thinking through some of these things. And so for one example right now is one area to veer off into is, in your opinion, do you think that beer distributors are well positioned to harness this growth? Are they going to miss out on THC drinks, or what would be the difference between someone that's eager and able to help this category grow and someone that's maybe going to be more reticent, more risk averse, and maybe therefore more likely to miss out? And what might that look like, in your opinion?
Yeah, so the term miss out is kind of a loaded term, and I'm going to avoid that one.
Sure.
So you can miss out. Okay, so if you have your head, it's rarer anymore. I think, beverage distributors, certainly beer distributors in general, are pretty damn sharp people, and they have their eye. They've learned the same lessons I have. So my skill set is not unique, right? So there are a lot of people that are keeping their eye out there. So you define two groups of people, and there are those, you use the term risk averse, all right, and they may be risk averse, but they're also in that category. I wouldn't call it risk averse. They are they have strong feelings about cannabis. Okay, so a new alcohol, if you're going to talk about whether it's alcoholic seltzer, whether it's alcoholic beer or alcoholic wine, it's all alcohol, right? And so there's no moral or new health decisions. It's pretty much out there what you know. The uncertainty on the THC business or in the industry, that in terms of knowledge that we have, and I certainly fall into this category, is we're still reading debates about the safety of the product and the long-term implications of the product, those kind of things. So I have friends who I respect their judgment. I don't fall into that category personally. I fall heavily, and we'll talk about it in a moment, into the regulatory control category. But in terms of that, I'm keeping an eye on it, and I'm trusting some of the bigger suppliers to help us. And then, as this unfolds, I want to be preparing for this. And so I think the fact that somebody would miss out, like our company and some others missed out on craft, or Anheuser-Busch missed out on light beer, that the fact that they're going to miss out on THC drinks for just having our head buried in the sand and thinking this is never going to happen. I don't think that there are many people in that category. It is more of a wait and see. So if you miss the boat, you might miss the boat because you're waiting too long to explore the possibilities of it. So regardless of which camp I was in on those things I just said, I would be, just like I was watching Doritos, I would be watching this closely, and I'd be talking to my suppliers, like Constellation with Canopy. What are your plans with how you go to market with this product? I'd be watching the legislature very closely. Before I left Maryland, I was appointed to this new 12-person alcohol commission as the representative from the alcohol industry. and I couldn't do it because I had changed my residence outside of Maryland. But the number one reason I wanted to be on that was to be part of the dialogue and the narrative on what the regulatory environment was going to look like for cannabis, because I personally think it's coming. And so I think that the person who doesn't begin to build those relationships for whatever reason, whether it's their own personal, moral, ethical, safety convictions or whatever, I would say that they don't really know. My opinion is those people in that camp don't know more about those things than I do. I just have a more open mind and saying, well, if it is determined to be viable, then I want to be there. And if it is, I'll make that decision when the time comes. And that's the reason I think people would miss out on it. The other thing is positioning and making the case with the major players in the cannabis business of why the beer distribution system would be the best route to market. So if we come to grips, federal laws work their way out. So let's just make this assumption that, from commerce to safety to regulations and whatnot, let's make an assumption that all those work out for a moment. Then it becomes a route to market decision for the suppliers, right? So some of the moves I see going on out there and a potential competition between wine and spirits distributors, say beer distributors, and I would be going, I'm not revealing the playbook here. I mean, this is just fact that anybody that has statewide distribution is probably not going to be as effective in their go-to-market strategy. Our competitive advantage in the beer business, and Gallo just identified this, and I'm going to phrase this, if I understood this correctly, and maybe I didn't, but they're contemplating moving this product High Noon, which is a spirits RTD, ready to drink product, considering opportunities to move that to beer distributors. That's what I've read. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying I read that through some industry source. And the number one reason I read somebody's conjecture or speculation, whether it's right or wrong, I'm going to keep emphasizing that is not a fact. That is just something that I read. Is there access to C-stores? And so if you take spirits and wine in a bottle, well, a beer distributor may not have core competence initially in that area. There's some that do. There's some that beer distributors are great wine distributors, and I know some of them. But I'll take our business. We were not. But if they brought us an RTD in a can, that you deliver as a full case, that's in our wheelhouse. I mean,
totally.
We're the best at that. And that's what I think beer distributors are the best at. So you have some wine and spirits people maybe rethinking, suppliers, maybe rethinking with those products who their optimal partners are for those, right? And so that's where is this going with the cannabis people? Well, like the craft people years ago, they were tempted for a one-stop shop, taking their brand to a statewide distributor, and then realized that it was a hotspot, approach to the product. If a customer calls me and they want it, I'll get it to them. But the ability to make it ubiquitous and market wide and every place where it ought to be, and that's the simple distribution rule. Target distribution is simply the number of places that represent every place it ought to be, right? So beer distributors are more nimble in that regard. So I would really be lobbying that case.
That's great.
To a potential cannabis partner, right?
Is an easy heuristic there that liquor distribution, generally speaking, has more SKUs and fewer drop points, and beer less SKUs, more drop points? Is that generally accurate?
I don't know, because it depends on the composition of the market. It could be true, but you were saying, is it make more sense for spirits because they have more SKUs? So the part about more SKUs is typically true because the spirits business, now you have boutique wine distillers now, you have some boutique spirits distributors emerging, I understand. But largely it's the mega guys, it's the breakthroughs, it's the glaciers, it's the Southern Wine and Spirit. Those are the big boys. Now their books are thousands of SKUs, right? So, you know, a big book for a distributor these days might be 1,800 SKUs. A typical book for a distributor is probably going to be in the 750 to 1,000 SKUs. But the chance that you're going to move up because of the absence of franchise laws for wine and spirits people, that you're going to move up in their book and your new cannabis product is going to compete with a premier spirits brand and get the same attention is unlikely. But with a beer distributor,
critical. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. This is a really important point. I was going to ask you some more about this too. So yeah, this is. I'm glad we're hitting on this.
So from my observation points, and I have only been in one state that is a non-chain market. So let me make sure I'm not speaking for every state and every market across the country. But from my vantage point, we were much more nimble and much more capable of building a new category than other beverage competitors.
Yep. So I love this because we also get a lot of questions from the THC drink brands themselves. And I think an interesting dynamic that's happening right now is that, as I kind of alluded to and we've discussed, the really big beer distributors are not currently playing in this space. And that's fine. They may in the future, they may not. That remains to be seen. But there are distributors today, both in wine and spirits and in beer, that are carrying these products on their trucks. Now, the problem that is faced by, let's say, a better than average THC drink brand is, do I go into business, go into partnership with someone who is currently willing to move these products and become my partner in that? But then the problem is, well, it's kind of like dating or something where you only have a pool of like one option versus if you had a pool of a lot of other options, you're more likely to find a really good long-term partner. And what I've been hearing in THC drinks today is that because there's a relatively more limited set of potential distribution partners, there is some agita about, well, am I giving up too much in an agreement today? Will I regret that a year or two from now? Let's say if you see some new ABI or Coors distributors come online, you're really going to feel like, I really wish I didn't do that deal a year ago because now I'm more limited in what I can do going forward. Can you give some advice in terms of if a THC drink is facing a question like this, what would be some things that you would look for when selecting a wholesale partner?
I'm going to bring up some things that I really don't know about. They would be questions in my mind. So
yeah,
I don't know, for example. So in Maryland right now, I know that recreational cannabis is legal, right? And so I don't know what to degree because I'm not there a major portion of the time. The availability of THC beverages are in that particular market. I just don't know. But then I don't know if they are available, I don't know what form they're available in. So if they're in a, which appeared to be the case in some that I saw on a shelf down here in Florida, if they are being sold, if it's a non-alcohol beer, because I would say, again, not knowing much about this, I would be very concerned personally about a alcoholic product that has THC in it.
Yeah.
That would, so let's separate that. Okay. So
yeah.
let's say that it is a non-alcohol beer product. It tastes like beer, but it has THC in it. I don't know if those products are out there right now, but if it's like a tea, that is infused with the THC, well, I don't know to what degree any kind of franchise laws would impact that. if that falls into, what category does that fall into? All right, so that matters if I'm the supplier and who I'm dealing with. If they had through, let's say a major supplier, I'm not going to name one, but let's just say a major supplier came out with a non-alcohol beer that was infused with THC, right?
Mm-hmm.
First question I'd have to ask is, does that fall under the beer franchise laws? If it does, well, that's a good thing, right?
Could you explain a little bit more about that? I don't fully understand about the dynamic with the franchise laws.
Well, the franchise laws are really an upshot of the three-tier system.
Okay.
And the tier system, has three primary functions: a commercial function, an economic function, a regulatory function. And so on the commercial function, it's important because of brand building, those things that we talked about. From the economic function, it's a big deal, and this is related to franchise laws, because wholesalers, in order to grow their businesses and keep things up to date, it's a very labor intensive and capital intensive business. It's a high cost of entry tier of the business, much more so than retail, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So a distributor may have to go buy a couple more trucks, might have to buy more racks for the warehouse. And so he's investing, several $100,000 to bet on a brand that's on the come. All right. So franchise laws are, not every state has them.
Right.
California has virtually no franchise laws, and Maryland has decent franchise laws. Virginia, Florida, Texas have very strong franchise laws, and that determines the ease at which a supplier can move their brand, right? And so if I'm coming into a market where there are no franchise laws, then all the things you said, I could make a mistake today in picking my partner and I could just move it like they do with spirits down the road.
Okay.
Right? If I'm in a strong franchise state and I take the product to them, then I need to make sure that I have a very good contract. And franchise laws get a bad name because of bad players. And I had many conversations with my friends who are craft brewers when I was involved with NBWA and folks on the BA. People I have tremendous respect for. We just had different points of view for how we looked at the three-tier system and franchise laws. And so the franchise laws, I can make the case of why they benefit the supplier every bit as they benefit the distributor. But let's just say that the reasons people have bad opinions is if I have a conversation with a craft guy who hates franchise laws, he's going to give me 10 examples of bad distributors who are brand hoarders and didn't invest in their brand. And I'm going to respond with 10 examples of bad craft brewers that didn't support their brands and had unreasonable expectations. But when you look at it, just eliminate the two long tails, and 90% in the middle was working famously. And that was my point. Why throw the baby out with the bathwater? And you've got a great system. So with franchise laws, as it relates to cannabis, as it relates to contracts aren't bad. Franchise laws aren't bad. It's the players that signed them and get involved with that are problems. So a supplier just needs to make sure he has picked a really good partner, right? And so back to my point about craft guys that might have gotten in bed with a statewide distributor or somebody that had a craft distributor in multiple states, and all of a sudden they found them leveraged, that if they tried to pull their brand from a distributor in one state, then the distributor might say, well, I'm gonna not give you my best effort, in this state, in retribution. And you don't want those kind of relationships. And so pick your partners well on the front end, and there are fundamental things that you look for in those partners. So if I'm that cannabis supplier with these drinks, you have to know what your environment is from the legal standpoint, what your product is, what laws control, have influence over the product, and then pick your partner, the best partner, accordingly.
Do you think that if let's say that I'm a THC drink supplier and I feel like I don't have great options, and I'm in a strong franchise law state, would your advice generally be maybe wait until you feel like you do have line of sight to a good partner because you're kind of getting married at that point? Or what would you say in that scenario?
I'm not waffling on you when I give you this response, although it's easy to interpret it that way.
Yeah.
I could not make a general statement.
Sure.
Because every state has different laws. Every situation is different. The competitive environment. All right. So if I had, for example, if the legislature was active in a state, right? And so Maryland has, or excuse me, Florida has what, referendum 3 or something like that, or ballot 3 or something, on the initiative for recreational marijuana in the state of Florida. All right. So if that passes, how is that going to change the landscape for access to market and the distributors? So if it's that imminent, it's in November, I'm sitting here in the middle of August, well, I'm going to wait.
Right.
I'm going to wait.
Right.
If I'm in a state where there is no damn way,
It's a really good point.
Way you read the order, and I'm going to call Ian Dominguez and I'm going to say, tell me what your view is of the state of X. And you just say, it ain't happening, man.
Not for now. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, then I would pick the best.
Interesting.
For the moment. So
that's really good.
You're going to wait, you're always going to wait for a prettier girl if you got a shot.
Right.
At least I did.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really good point. I know our brand partners and friends are going to really appreciate that nuance. So thank you for that. I want to wrap this up with one more topic that is, I know, near and dear to your heart, and something that I think I see opportunity here in terms of bridging this gap and getting everybody to row in the same direction. And that's, if you could speak a little bit about your views on regulation and the ways that beer distributors maintain an orderly market and some of the other selling points for the structure in place.
Yeah.
The reason for the ask from my perspective is that I want the THC drink industry to understand what are the strengths of this network and how can we help hopefully add to that and strengthen the overall system. So if you can speak a little bit about that, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. I'm likely going to give you a couple of examples here of why the regulatory environment is favorable the way it is. And I'm certainly not going to mention any names, but I can tell you a very specific experience. Nobody can say this is conjecture, to me, or, that'll never happen. The examples I've given happened to me, right? And so when you look at the regulatory environment, and we all want free will. We all want the, ability to do any damn thing we want to do whenever we want to do it, right? But you have to have the discipline and the responsibility to do the right thing when those choices come along. And so it doesn't always work that way. And so, the orderly market thing is a big, big deal in the regulatory environment. That's huge. Access to market is a big, big deal in the regulatory environment. The safety of products and the chain of custody of products is a big, big deal in the regulatory market. And the come to rest laws, people go, that's just stupid. And I mean, my fellow distributors in Maryland really argued against them. And I said, no, I argue for them, that has real value. So there's certain laws that on the surface, you're like, that's just a pain in the neck. But wow, when you need them, they're there to maintain the orderly markets. And so, for example, access to market, right? So if you didn't have agreements with suppliers with performance standards with distributors with performance standards and that kind of thing, and that you didn't have contractual agreements for the performance standards, right? And then the distributor didn't have the feeling of, well, if I invest all of this money and I invest in all these standards and I build this thing after I've invested all this money and you're going to yank it away from me a year from now, well, you're just not going to get the investment in the brand. I mean, people need to have some sense of certainty. You know, are you in the options market or are you in the bond market? You know, and so, you know, most of us are, you know, in the blue chip bond category.
Sure.
And so that's one thing on the investment side. On the orderly market piece, I mean, this is huge where in the alcohol business, it's against federal law, for example. Now, this doesn't fall into the franchise law category, but it's against federal law for alcohol suppliers and distributors to buy shelf space, like Procter and Gamble does for Coca-Cola does. You know, where you're paying for shelf space. Well, go into the average, you know, major grocery chain, Kroger or Publix or JB or, you know, those, and go down the soda aisle and look at all that space that's allocated to the big boys and look how much is allocated to the independents. And so
one clarification, sorry on that. So is something like a slotting fee in retail not allowed in?
Absolutely not. Totally.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So that was one that everybody didn't agree on. And so, and then they're very careful to make sure, as for example, Mountain Dew stuck their toe in the water recently with this alcohol product.
Right.
You know, they're very careful to watch that to make sure that the slotting fees for the non-alcohol Mountain Dew did not influence. But how are you really going to control that when it comes down to it? You know, if everybody has that. So the access to market for the smaller players is enhanced. So the big guys can't dominate and just squash the competition. So you have that access to market. You know, we were, as a distributor, directed by a supplier one time to do something that was just patently illegal. And I was told that if I didn't do it, they would find somebody that could. And I said, so you're telling me if I don't break the law, you're going to find somebody that will? And thanks to the franchise laws, they weren't going to. But if I had capitulated, every other product that we represented would have been injured as a result.
Right.
And so it ensures a level playing field to give the emerging players an opportunity to grow, and at the same time, you know, keep an orderly market. And so when you look at, and this is important, particularly for the emerging players, even for the big guys, quite honestly, when you're trying to control costs and, you know, achieve financial goals, the states in this regulatory conference that we're going to next week, you'll hear this over and over again, Ian. They are across the country. States are typically grossly underfunded with their regulatory departments.
Sounds familiar.
So what do they rely upon? They rely upon the players, the distributors in the market, to self-police and manage one another. And so I'd get a call occasionally, every once in a while, you know, one of my guys would go rogue and do something that they shouldn't have done, but man, I slapped it down, and every once in a while I'd call them and say, hey, you know, this was questionable. And we kind of looked out for one another as an industry. And the real problems, quite honestly, the biggest lawbreakers, not because they were bad people and insidious individuals, but they were the small players in the market, not the big ones, who were under tremendous pressure to meet financial goals for their brew pros, craft brewers, who they were trying to sell for. So they would be the ones to give away free kegs or give away extra cases, something like that, because desperate means require desperate measures, and that kind of desperation. And so we were able to, as a distributor, slap that down if we had a new supplier that was doing that, or recognize it was somebody else. And again, it protects the avenue to the consumer for all players in the market. It's not a self-serving thing for distributors. You know, everybody wins. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is the chain of custody thing if there's a safety issue. And so
Absolutely.
over the years, you know, we've read about major recalls that have taken place. Well, this is a major role that distributors play, is we record, that's come to rest I was talking about, we record everything that comes into the warehouse, and typically most suppliers have labels on their products that identify the production lines. And so if they had a product, we can immediately get out in that market and get that out. So a number of years ago, Sam Adams had an issue, and Coors had an issue. I know Anheuser-Busch had an issue. Constellation had an issue. The biggest and the best, you're going to have an issue every once in a while. And to be able to remove that and protect the public from harm in that regard is a big, big deal. So, this regulatory environment has commercial value, certainly, economic value, certainly, but that regulatory value is really critical to competition and to public interest and safety.
Well, this has been phenomenal. I'm so thankful that you took the time to talk through some of this with me. So thank you so much. I know our audience and folks in THC Beverage especially will come away with a lot from this. So really, again, thank you so much. I'm excited to see you next week in person. And thanks again, Eric.
Okay, thanks for having me. Take care, Ian.
All right, take care.